The History of the World podcast, written and presented by Chris Hasler.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Where is Daredevil?
I'm right here. Don't miss the return of Marvel Television's Daredevil Born Again.
So what's next?
I feel liberated.
We're gonna take this city back.
Over medicated.
In an all-new season, now streaming only on Disney+.
They're hunting us. It's time we started hunting them.
I can work with that.
This should be tons of fun.
Marvel Television's Daredevil Born Again, now streaming only on Disney+.
Volume 4, The Medieval World. Episode 69, The Profile of Genghis Khan, Part 1. It is my pleasure to bring you the podcast episode on Genghis Khan, the man who created one of the greatest global empires that ever existed. He is popular in modern imagination as he came from the mysterious Mongolic people of the Eastern Steppe, and he is impressive due to his ability to terrorise nations that had developed technological advancements that his race of people originally had no knowledge of. It has been no problem finding material about Genghis Khan in my library. History books are full of references to Genghis Khan. Such is his monumental legacy. We have learned in previous episodes about the origin of the Mongols and how the lineage of Genghis Khan can be traced back a number of generations. This lineage has been called the Kiad Borjid, named after a Mongol subclan brought together at around the beginning of the 10th century by a Mongol tribal chieftain called Bodonchar Munka, whose father was of the Kiad clan and whose mother was of the Borjin clan. It is common to hear the branch of the Mongol Khans from which Genghis Khan is a descendant referred to as the Borjids, and the Borjids would continue to rule Mongolia right up until the 20th century, and the very name of the Borjin itself is still held in high esteem in modern Mongolia. Genghis Khan's father was called Isuge. Isuge was not a Khan, but a Bakhtur. A Bakhtur is a distinguished Mongol warrior, and although some Bakhturs attain the level of a Khan, Isuge did not. A Khan is a leader and a ruler. Isuge had ambitions of being a Mongol Khan, but there were others within his family who had the same ambition. Isuge would attempt to cement his place as the viable ruler of his clan by creating his own branch of the dynasty, and he would do this by capturing a woman called Ulan from a tribal confederation called the Mergids. He would marry her so that she would be his chief wife, and she bore him 5 children, the first of which was the future Genghis Khan. It is suggested that Genghis Khan was born around the year 1162, and he was named Temüjin. There are a couple of strange things about the birth of Genghis Khan. Firstly, his name Temüjin is a Tatar name for a blacksmith. Historians scratch their heads about why a Mongol warrior would name his son using a word that belongs to a language of a rival race of people. The most popular theory is that he was named after a senior Tartar who had been captured by Isuge, and that it could have been down to a tradition that this senior Tartar's name was given to the baby. Secondly, the baby is noted for being born with a clot of blood the size of a knuckle bone in his right hand, and it is speculated that the Mongols viewed such a thing as symbolic of the child being destined to become a great ruler. Sources vary regarding the timelines and exact years of events in Temüjin's young life. The Mongols of the 12th century steppe didn't have literature, but very shortly after Genghis Khan's death, a history of the Mongols was written, and it is the earliest literature written in Mongolian called The Secret History of the Mongols. The book seems to tell us nothing of Temüjin's childhood before the age of 9. When he was 9, his father, Isuge, took him to the tribe of Temüjin's mother, Urlan. The tribe were the Alhunut forest people. There he met with a man called Day the Wise, and he would introduce Isuge to his 10-year-old daughter called Borte. Day the Wise asked Isuge to leave Temüjin at their tribal camp so that the two children could spend some time together in preparation for their betrothal to each other. Isuge left Temüjin at the Alhunut camp and then rode back to his own clan, but came across a Tartar camp where he stopped for refreshments. The Tartars recognised Isuge and poisoned his drink. Isuge would only realise what had happened after he left the Tartar camp, when he felt his health rapidly declining. After Isuge passed away, Temüjin was taken back to his home clan where his mother was. Isuge's death created a disintegration of his tribe, and Urlan and her children were rejected from the tribe and spent their lives living off the land as fugitives. They had no right to survive, but Urlan and her children bravely survived as hunter-gatherers for a long time. During these tough childhood years living in the tribal wilderness, Temüjin would become acquainted with a young boy called Jamucha. Temüjin and Jamucha became Anda, which is a Mongolic term for blood brothers. The two would pledge a spiritual allegiance to each other and consecrated it by sharing gifts. The gifts included arrows and arrowheads. Temüjin had an older half-brother called Behter, another son of Isuge by a different mother. Behter had claimed possession of a bird and some fish that Temüjin and his younger full brother Hasar had caught. When Temüjin complained to his mother chastised him for suggesting such a thing, emphasising the importance of family sticking together. Enraged, Temüjin and Hasar went out with their bows and arrows and struck down Behter. Urlan was disconsolate over the behaviour of her sons, cold-blooded, fratricidal murderers. In a world where family needed to stick together, Temüjin had committed an irreversibly reckless and thoughtless act that would endanger his entire family by weakening their numbers. In another event, Temüjin was captured by the Taichuds, who were a branch of the Borjids, but who saw Temüjin as their rival. They placed Temüjin in a device called a kangu, which was essentially a heavy wooden board which would be fitted around the neck and the wrists of the victim. Temüjin would have unlikely been able to escape from this bind if it wasn't for the help of one member of the Taichuds called Sorhun Shir, who took pity on Temüjin and allowed him to escape at great risk to himself. There is no doubt that Temüjin's childhood was a tough and turbulent one. Not only were Temüjin and his family living a hand-to-mouth existence, but they faced the constant opposition of rival tribes who understood the potential importance of Temüjin as the eldest son of Isuge by his chief wife, Oğlan.
Marriage and adulthood.
Temüjin was coming of age, and as a man he had been forged by the hardships he faced while growing up. Temüjin was possibly around 16 years old when he returned to the village of the Alhanut forest people to be reunited with Borte, the woman who he had been betrothed to some 7 years earlier. The official marriage that would take place would have brought the Alhanuts closer to Temüjin's own tribe. It would have been a happy and hopeful event for everyone concerned. Temüjin would also have his sights set on expanding his alliances further still. In the same way that Temüjin had created an ander with Jamukha, Temüjin's father had created an ander with a man called Tuhrul. Tuhrul was the Khan of a tribal confederation called the Kurates, potentially a powerful ally for Temüjin. So Temüjin took a gift of a sable fur-skin gown, which was originally a gift from the Alhanuts to Temüjin's mother, Oğlan. Tuhrul was extremely happy with the gift and pledged to help his blood brother's son to reunite the Borgids. Temüjin would need to call on his allies to deal with an unforeseen crisis that occurred while Temüjin and his tribe were fleeing for the mountains while escaping the Merkids. If you recall, Temüjin's father, Isuge, had taken his chief wife and Temüjin's mother, Oğlan, away from the Merkids before Temüjin was born. Now, in a vengeful twist of fate, while Temüjin was fleeing for the mountains, his own wife, Borte, was captured while also trying to flee from the Merkids. When Temüjin approached his father's blood brother Tuhrul for help to rescue his wife from the Merkids, it appears that Tuhrul was only too happy to help. Temüjin's own blood brother Jamukha was now the leader of his own clan and was also ready to support his ander Temüjin. The operation to rescue Borte from the Merkids was no small operation. It can be easy to see this event as a daring rescue from a camp by a few men, but this is nothing like the scale that the secret history of the Mongols portrays. The combined forces of Temüjin, Tuhrul and Jamukha are described as numbering tens of thousands, and the planning and preparation must have taken a number of months. When the Merkids learned of the sheer magnitude of the attack, they fled. When Borte heard Temüjin crying out her name, she leapt from one of the Merkids' carts and quickly leapt into the protective arms of her husband. Temüjin had successfully rescued his wife from the Merkids, and the value of this is that everyone would quickly realise that Temüjin was a winner and somebody who could be looked up to and respected. We know that Borte must have been a captive of the Merkids for a considerable amount of time because when she was rescued, she was heavily pregnant, and although Temüjin brought up the child as his own, there was sufficient doubt about whether he was the father. It was around the year 1182 when the child was born, and he was named Jochi. This would have been around the time when Temüjin was approximately 20 years old. Temüjin would have other children through his wife Borte, but the issue of Jochi's questionable paternity would certainly become a factor for them when issues arose concerning the children's inheritance, so it would not bode well for Jochi in his future. During his lifetime, Temüjin would have numerous wives, as is traditional in Mongolic culture, and those wives would bear him many children. This is not even to mention the considerable amount of concubines that Temüjin would ultimately have, and who even knows just how many offspring he would have been ultimately responsible for siring. For the purpose of our story, we will focus on the children that are most significant to the story of Temüjin and the rise of the Mongol Empire. Within 10 years of Jochi's birth, there were 3 more sons that Borti would give birth to. They are known to us today as Chade, Ugade and Tule. Temüjin and Borti would also have 5 daughters.
Uniting the tribes of the steppe.
As an adult, Temüjin was proving himself to be a warrior of some significant ability and a brave and fearless leader, which would undoubtedly attract allies and concern enemies. It was certainly one thing to attract allies, but making them his obedient subjects was a skill that Temüjin apparently possessed. As leaders, and certainly some of Temüjin's ancestors had done in the past, Temüjin would work to subjugate as many of the Mongol tribes as possible to live under his leadership. One binding factor that Temüjin used was discipline, and he would insist that those that were subject to him were loyal to his rule. This is what made Temüjin's military subjects so formidable. Temüjin would continue to have problems with the Merkids, and the Merkids would also claim that the young Jochi, whose paternity was in question, belonged to them and not to Temüjin. Temüjin would never allow the Merkids to get the upper hand in their ongoing disputes. Temüjin would also face opposition from within the Mongol tribes themselves, as the brothers of Temüjin's deceased father, Yisegai, saw the rise of Temüjin as a threat to what they believed to be their rightful entitlement to be the leader of the Mongol tribes. Another factor that would help Temüjin is his recognition that following tradition was not always the best move, and Temüjin would look to promote capable individuals to be his deputies rather than his blood relatives, and he simply didn't care if this upset his extended family members. Temüjin was all about success, and so he would focus on whatever it took to achieve this. Temüjin's sphere of influence was growing to a large number, and he recognised the need for discipline to maintain order throughout his subjects. The Mongolic tribes didn't write things down, so the code of discipline was verbal. This would be recognised as something called yasa, which can be loosely translated to mean law, and we actually see this word in the modern Turkish language. Temüjin's codes of conduct would focus on the behaviour of individuals, and there were some extremely harsh penalties for those who didn't follow certain laws. So, for example, I've read in places that individuals can be sentenced to death for some relatively minor misdemeanours, such as not returning another man's slave or committing adultery. It may have been this ability to tightly control the conduct of the tribes under his rule that would gradually grind down the threats of the Merkids to the Mongols over time. Undoubtedly, the support of the Herates under the rule of Genghis Khan was a factor in achieving this success. Over the course of the final years of the 12th century, the Merkid tribes were weakened, separated and absorbed by other tribes, so that their presence as a threat or even a political entity diminished to little or nothing. Leaders, despite their alliances, would always have half an eye on each other. And this was no different than with Temüjin, his father's blood brother Genghis Khan, and his own blood brother Temüjin. The people of the steppe were a complex mixture of tribes, some of which were confederated, and often to be found coalesced into their ethnic divisions, whether they be Merkits, Herates, Tartars or Naimans, among others. It would be the presence of so many different competing factions that would make it sensible for there to be alliances such as the ones that Temüjin had forged with Tughril Khan and Jamukha. The three of them had something in common though, and that is that they all wanted to be the supreme ruler of as many people as possible, if not for their own desire for power, but for their necessity to create power to oppose the power of others. The timeline of events that led to the climax of the rivalries between these three great leaders is often blurred and confused by the accounts of different sources, but if I follow the narrative of John Mann in his book called The Mongol Empire, then we hear of a very definite rivalry for overall power emerging between Temüjin and his blood brother Jamukha by the turn of the 13th century. Temüjin appealed to Tughril Khan for a union, but Tughril Khan was highly suspicious of Temüjin's intentions, probably believing that he was vying for power to become the ruler of the Herates for himself. It seems that Jamukha himself was eyeing the very same thing, and he was secretly plotting to assassinate Tughril Khan to take control of the Herates himself. But Tughril Khan discovered the plot, and this compromised the alliance that Tughril Khan and Jamukha had previously enjoyed. With Tughril Khan no longer having the alliance of Jamukha, he was now a weak target for Temüjin to consider. Tughril Khan's suspicions of Temüjin had alienated him, and now Temüjin saw Tughril Khan as a viable target, and warfare between the two caused Tughril Khan to flee westwards into Naiman territory. The Naimans decided to execute Tughril Khan, but Temüjin was unimpressed by this act of betrayal by the Naimans towards his respected enemy, former ally and blood brother of his father, Tughril Khan. Temüjin then had to turn his attention to dealing with his own blood brother, Jamukha. Jamukha himself was being sheltered by the very same Naimans that Tughril Khan had sought refuge from. As far as Temüjin was concerned, the Naimans were enemies of the Khamag Mongols, the coalition that Temüjin was now firmly in control of. The Naimans were led by Tayang Khan, and when Temüjin battled with the Naimans, Tayang Khan was killed. Tayang Khan had a son who had fought alongside him called Khukhluch, who fled westwards to Karakitai, while Jamukha fled to the lands of the Merkits. Temüjin continued to pursue Jamukha into Merkit territory, and he would defeat the Merkits and capture Jamukha. As far as the story goes, Temüjin was willing to offer Jamukha some clemency following his capture because, after all, they were blood brothers. However, Jamukha accepted that his fate should be his death and that he just wanted to have a Khan's execution. This means that no blood should be shed, such as in a beheading, which was the death that Tughril Khan had experienced. Temüjin granted him his wish of a bloodless death, and so the soldiers of Temüjin broke Jamukha's back. This is the end of the story for Jamukha. It was now abundantly clear that Temüjin was the most powerful man of the steppe lands of the Mongols and their allies. Temüjin was a winner. He was innovative when it came to structuring his society and his military. He believed in promoting the best man for the job as opposed to somebody entitled by hereditary right. So young and capable men realised that they could have a bright future within Temüjin's clan, and this could have been an attractive prospect for those who were tempted into defecting from Temüjin's enemies to Temüjin's own clan. Temüjin's use of flags was significant. This is not completely different to many areas of the world, especially in battle where flags and banners would be used to convey information such as where the leader was, which was quite important when tens of thousands of men were engaged in battle on the field. Temüjin would use flags to good effect, not just to highlight his own position but to convey instructions on the battlefield. This would enable him to separate his forces into smaller and more effective units without losing the overall cohesiveness of the entire army. In turn, this made the entire army of Temüjin effective in warfare and an army to be feared. Women would be taken and distributed as trophies of battle by the Mongols. Often the daughters of defeated chieftains would either be taken to be wives or concubines of Temüjin or Temüjin's male relatives. They were treated like booty or spoils of victory. However, it appears that these women understood their position in society and expressed some gratitude for being prized by a great leader such as Temüjin. Temüjin's wife, Borte, would have power and possessions in her own right. The same can be said of the Tartar princess Isugen, who was also a wife of Temüjin and taken into his possession when the Tartars were defeated by the Mongols. Isugen felt valued by Temüjin and was grateful for her life after being captured, and also secured the same position for her own older sister, Isui, by requesting that Temüjin marry her too. There was also a Merkid princess called Hulan, who was given as a gift of surrender by her father, Deru-sun, following his defeat. Originally, Hulan was intended to be given to one of Temüjin's military generals, but ultimately she would end up being a wife of Temüjin himself, and as such would often accompany him into battle, as well as having her own court and possession of a landmark and its surrounding lands, which was traditional for all of his wives. Hulan was granted possession of the Khenti Mountains. Isugen was granted the Khangai Mountains, while her elder sister, Isui, was granted the Toul River. Temüjin's own daughters would be given to the chieftains of other tribes of the steppe, such as the Herates and the Uyghurs, while another born by his wife Borte was given to her mother's own nephew of the Alkanut forest people. However, we can feel very sure that those women of conquered tribes who were not in any way related to anybody of any significance faced a far more grim reality when their tribes were conquered, and if they were not killed, would have likely have to have witnessed their families and their children being killed, and likely subjected to horrific acts of rape before being killed themselves, all of which portrays a very chilling account of the Mongols, which has resonated throughout history to our perception of them to this very day.
The Great Khan.
A few years into the 13th century, and we can certainly claim that Temüjin had defeated most of the tribes of the steppe and was ready to gather the most important individuals across the lands of the steppe. In the year 1206, Temüjin called a Kurultai. A Kurultai is a national assembly and could often be called for military reasons, but generally for political reasons. At the Kurultai of 1206, Temüjin would be officially acknowledged as the supreme ruler of the Mongols and their associated tribes of the steppe. At long last, Temüjin would be recognised as the Khan that he truly was. The dozens of loyal companions of Temüjin were also recognised and honoured. Among the gatherers were representatives from all of the former tribal enemies of Temüjin, including Merkids, Tartars, Taichuds, Herates and Naimans, among a number of others. All of them were bowed down to their new Khan's superiority. They all stood under the standard of their great Khan, which was a white flag on which would be tied the tails of 9 horses. This loyal assembly are described as an assembly of the felt-walled tents. Those nomads who, unlike the developed societies of the south, lived their lives in semi-nomadic transit and in the temporary accommodation of these felt-walled tents. All of the tribes would be brought into the Mongol ulus, a universal polity of Temüjin, and something that we might call an empire. It is suggested that an influential shaman made the great proclamation that Temüjin would be referred to as Genghis Khan, which is something that has been more commonly pronounced Genghis Khan in the Western world, until more recently when a closer approximation to the correct local pronunciation, Genghis Khan, is starting to be preferred. The name Genghis Khan itself acknowledges a more universal type of Khan, alluding to his mightiness and his far-reaching powers compared to many other Khans that had preceded him. Also, the family line of the Kiat Borjids, of which Genghis Khan was a descendant of, would be regarded as the golden lineage, which would be the supreme lineage and the only lineage from which sovereign leaders could come from, and all other Mongol nobles would be the subjects of the golden lineage. Even though this sounds very exclusive, the Mongol recruitment process would be very inclusive. In order to achieve his ambitious goals, Genghis Khan would require numbers, and this means that in order to increase his numbers, the conquered tribes of the steppe would need to be incorporated into the Mongol Empire, and their numbers needed to believe that they were better off belonging to the Mongol Empire. Genghis Khan would use this basic model as his springboard to expanding his imperial reach into
study and play. Come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
Experience a membership that backs your business journey with American Express Business Platinum. When you pay with membership rewards points for all or part of an eligible flight booked with a qualifying airline through Amex Travel, you can get 35% of those points back, up to 1 million points back per calendar year. American Express Business Platinum. There's nothing like it. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-platinum.
nationally. And we will talk more about that further expansion next time. Thank you very much for listening to this week's episode of the History of the World podcast on Genghis Khan. The early years, it was going to be a one-parter. It's turned into a two-parter, so you get more Genghis Khan next time. If you enjoy the podcast and you'd like to support the podcast, please visit our website, historyoftheworldpodcast.com. Click on the Patreon link and sign up to make a monthly contribution. You'll become a lifelong member of the History of the World podcast Illuminati, and you'll qualify for gifts and rewards. If you want to get in touch with the podcast, drop me a line at historyoftheworldpodcast@mail.com. Also, you can follow the podcast on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Tumblr, Threads, and Mastodon. If you can't get enough of the podcast, then look out for the special debrief episode where I'll be talking some more about the episode that you just listened to, and there'll be a few extra bits and pieces besides.
Listener messages and reviews.
Just a couple of messages this week. Shannon has written in once again and said, "Hello, Chris. Shannon from New Zealand here again. Still don't know if I'm messaging you properly. Just got to your Frankish episodes and I had to message to say that this is what brought me to your podcast in the first place. So I've been looking for stuff on early France, the Merovingians, the Carolingians. I found your episodes but decided to just listen from the beginning and finally got to where I wanted. Good episodes. I'm catching up fast, and when I do, I can consider myself a proper hot welder. Until then, I cannot. See you soon when I finally do catch up. Well, I certainly consider you to be a hot welder, Shannon. Don't worry about that. Ian Van Alphen's written in and said, "Hi Chris, I'm just checking in to tell you that I'm still enjoying your podcast. A few episodes ago you mentioned that you didn't get as many messages as you used to. I felt bad especially since you were doing such a great job with the podcast, and you had sent me this great t-shirt, even though I didn't reply to your email inquiring about my size. Luckily you had guessed my size correctly. Thank you so much for this gift. You're welcome, Ian. Although I didn't answer your email, I'm still very happy to be able to stroll around with this icon. I truly hope that the drop-in messages doesn't reflect your listener ratings. I have to be honest, I had some trouble coping with the last few episodes about the Asian parts of the world, even though their history is fascinating. It's just that the names of people and places are harder to imprint, at least for me, and perhaps also because it's the first time I've really come into contact with these stories. I'm sure it will improve when more stories will come to me, also from other sources. I've just finished the book Guns, Germs and Horses by Jared Diamond. I didn't see it on your bibliography. Be sure to read it as soon as you get the chance. I was really amazed by the simplicity of his story, and a lot of things made so much more sense right now. It's not really a story like you are telling us, but more an explanation of the present by the past, how it came to be that wealth and power are divided the way they are now. Right now, I'm starting with The Earth Transformed by Peter Frankopan, a history explained through climate change. Something you've been talking about as well. So far, very interesting. Anyway, not trying to impose my personal life on you, but just wanted to let you know that I'm still enjoying your stories, that I'm looking forward to every new episode, and I enjoy the magazines as well, because repetition teaches best. Keep it up. You're doing great, Ian. Yes, Ian, you're right. The latest episodes have been difficult for people who are not of those cultures. It's very difficult to get your head around things and understand it. And, there are periods in, certainly in Chinese history, where we don't know as much as we might like to. And it's just really a procession of new regimes replacing one another. And so it can be quite tedious. Certainly the most tedious period is the Chinese Dark Ages. It's just really not a lot of stories that you can tell other than they went, they came along, then they went, then they came along. But hopefully now the sort of the Chinese story is starting to develop a bit more as we get into as we go towards modernity, and certainly the story of the Mongols is unmissable. So thank you, Ian. Very interesting choice of books there. And I've got one of Peter Frankopan's that I'm working with now with the Silk Roads. Tells us a bit about the origin of the steppe cultures, etc. So very interesting email. Thank you very much, and I'm glad you like the t-shirt. Anyway, that's it for this particular episode. Don't forget to now go and listen to the debrief episode, which gives you 10 minutes more material, and all free of charge. All free of charge. Anyway, thank you so much, and until next time, until we speak again, be good.
The History of the World podcast, written and presented by Chris Hasler. Please consider making a financial contribution by going to the historyoftheworldpodcast.com website and clicking on the Patreon link. Email the show at historyoftheworldpodcast@mail.com. And don't forget to join our social media at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Tumblr. See you next time.